Hey everyone! Before we begin, I'd like for whoever's listening to imagine being able to see someone thinking, not by guessing or not by asking them, but by watching electrical signals from the brain change in real time. And this is what EEG technology allows us to do. My project, Electroencephalogram or EEG, frequency changes during cognitive tasks, investigates how brain patterns shift when a person moves from resting to focused mental activity, and how computational analysis can reveal those changes in a measurable way. My category is computational biology and bioinformatics since we're analyzing EEG waves and using Python to process and filter any noise out of it. And yeah, let's proceed. So, the purpose of this study was to determine whether measurable changes in EEG frequencies can occur when a person transitions from a resting state to a cognitive task. And the research question was whether or not and how do EEG theta and alpha frequencies change during cognitive tasks. Like, let's say if you were to press your fists and to make the move or to blink your eyes, just controlling your brain and just moving around, it's just being measured. And this matters because attention, learning, and mental health are all linked to these frequencies. So if we can track them accurately, we can better understand focus, fatigue, and even early signs of neurological disorders. And not just this, but we can use the computation to help personalize learning and mental health tools for the future. For the purposes of this experiment, it's good to have some background knowledge. So, alpha waves between 8 and 12 Hz are strongest when the brain is relaxed and unfocused. Theta waves, which are from 4 to 8 Hz, increase during memory use and mental effort. And the previous studies often examined single participants or only used expensive clinical software. My approach used open EEG datasets and Python processing to compare multiple individuals under identical conditions, which makes this method a lot more accessible and reproducible. Now, for the hypothesis, I hypothesized that if participants perform a cognitive task, then alpha activity will decrease and theta activity will increase compared to rest, because the brain shifts from the regular idle synchronization to active information processing. And my variables will essentially just be the mental state of the rest versus task as my independent variable. My dependent variable will be the theta and alpha amplitude, which is basically just saying how many brain waves are measured in hertz of theta and alpha. So just measuring which one has more of a layout in the situation, whether or not if they're doing a cognitive task or if they're resting. My controls are just using the same dataset structure, which is just Python, and the same filter range from 1 to 40 Hz, the same Python processing pipeline, and the same number of runs per participant, which was 14 runs because I used the public EEG dataset and they used that trial amount. For my methods of this experiment, I analyzed EEG recordings from 5 participants, and each participant completed 14 experimental runs, which alternated between resting and task states. And the raw signals were processed in Python using a 1 to 40 Hz bandpass filter. And I extracted quantitative measurements in microvolts, which included the mean, median, mode, and standard deviation, and I organized them into tables and graphs for comparison. And just the type of data would just be quantitative with metric units of microvolts. Since the data was fully quantitative and measured in metric units of microvolts, I used multiple trials per participant to improve the reliability and to reduce random error. And to minimize any bias, all participants performed the same task structure and identical filtering methods were applied to every file. But there could be like possible limitations included in background noise for EEG signals and natural individual differences in brain activity, but I still collected the alpha and theta amplitudes for the rest versus task comparisons, and I organized all of my data using tables, graphs, descriptive statistics, and collected data from a minimum of 14 trials, which was all recorded by the public EEG. So for the actual data that I collected, here are examples of my Python workflow, statistical tables, and frequency graphs. So the graphs would actually show a consistent pattern, and I actually measured all of the numbers here, and it just essentially shows that the theta power increased during cognitive tasks and alpha power is decreased from a resting baseline. And this actually confirms that the brain did shift from a relaxed synchronization to focus processing, which means that my hypothesis was correct. But I also want to show you my Python coding, which is in this video that I took right here. And I'm just going to play this video just to show how my process was.
Hey everyone! So, here is the Python pipeline that I created to process the EEG data that was collected from 5 participants. So the raw signals were actually first filtered between 1 and 40 Hz to remove all of this noise such as like eye blinks and muscle activity. And this program then isolated the theta band, which was from 4 to 8 Hz, and then the alpha band from 8 to 12 Hz, because these frequencies are usually more closely linked to attention and cognitive engagement. So through the statistics table, as I'll show right here, there was also statistics that were generated from here that I made. And basically, for each of the 14 experimental runs per subject, the code calculated quantitative measures, including the mean, median, the standard deviation, to compare resting versus task conditions. And for the graphs, which were shown here across all 5 participants during their resting and task states, and basically these results generated here would show a consistent pattern. As you can see here, the theta power would increase during cognitive tasks while alpha power decreases. And that also reflects how the brain shifts from relaxed idling to more focused processing. And this workflow would basically just demonstrate how how accessible computational tools can transform to raw brain signals from a regular EEG with all of those brain waves into actual measurable evidence about human cognition. And we can see this more here. When I processed it into EEG results, you can see all of these numbers that you can transfer into basic statistics. So you can clearly see here oh, this is clearly larger, and it also helps with more visual aids and data analysis. But that's basically it for my Python. And not only this, but using Python actually helps a lot more because it makes things a lot quicker for processing a lot of raw EEG data, and it filters out all of the noise that you don't need so that you can have the actual information you need to make your conclusions and data analysis. But yeah, bye!
So from my video, these are just the other graphs that prove my hypothesis that I generated from Python. So as you can see, the theta rest and task states consistently stay a lot higher than the alpha rest and alpha task, which proves that attention spans of the brain actually send more electrical signals throughout, and EEGs can actually be processed by Python so we can measure this into visual data and statistics. For more analysis of my data, I'm just going to go through sections. So this data did show us how the bandpass filtered raw EEG data from 1 to 40 Hz to remove other artifacts that was in the data, like if you were to blink your eye or muscle noise or just other brain waves like just regular beta that we aren't looking for. And I just extracted the theta, which is 4 to 8 Hz, and alpha, which is 8 to 12 Hz, from 14 runs per participants. And I just computed the mean, median, mode, and standard deviation as I showed before for my resting and task states. And this means that theta increased during cognitive tasks, which indicates that there's usually more focused attention and working memory. And since alpha decreased during tasks, that means that there's a reduced idle or relaxed state in the brain. And the statistics and graphs shown by the data from Python does show a consistent pattern as we saw in the graphs. And that just means that there's more reproducible neural responses. So our hypothesis was correct. But why does all this matter? Well, it matters because the analysis of theta and alpha waves during cognitive tasks and resting states shows us that accessible computational tools can actually convert raw EEG data into objective metrics for studying attention, learning, and cognitive performance. So we can filter out regular raw EEG data through Python to get the information that we need to learn more about the brain and more about behavioral sciences. So for the real world impact, we can actually apply this use of EEGs and processing it through Python by bringing it to attention monitoring. So we can see how people pay more attention to certain tasks or different things and see how the brain reacts to that. We can have neurofeedback training since we'll know more personalized things about people's brains in specific. We can also detect more learning difficulties and you can have more personalized study strategies since you know how much your brain pays attention and how much it stays idle. And this all shows the power of computational biology in neuroscience because you wouldn't be able to measure EEGs or break it down into the waves that you need to learn more about the brain if it wasn't for computational biology. So, to conclude, my data did support the hypothesis that cognitive tasks increase data activity and reduce alpha activity across participants, and this project effectively demonstrates that Python based EEG analysis can reliably detect mental state changes and has potential applications in education, medicine, and human performance. Future work could include more participants, different task types, and machine learning models to predict attention levels, but the brain does show measurable and predictable electrical signals when going to rest to thinking states. Well, for the real world impact and what makes this project different, well, I compared multiple participants, which were five, with 24 trials each, and used a Python pipeline instead of a pre made EEG software, and compared raw signals of the EEG just by with regular wavelengths and actually tune out all of the other information that wasn't needed and turned it into statistics for real world interpretation. And for actually impacting the real world, it can help education by helping identify when students are truly focused, and it helps support personalized study strategies. And for mental health, it could have the potential for early detection of attention deficits, and it monitors cognitive fatigue or stress. For key takeaways, there were a few limitations to this project, is what I agree with, because there was a small sample size of 5, and it was a consumer grade of EEG resolution. And there was a short task duration of this because we could have had more tasks, but that's what I got from the public EEG. And there were a few Python errors that I had to go through to actually filter it out. But in the future, to fix these things, I could add beta and gamma bands for deeper cognition testing. So basically, more brainwaves that I'd be analyzing. I'd test different task types, like more instead of just opening and closing your fist or imagining things. And I would also use machine learning to classify focused versus distracted. So I'd actually use like my own or like an actual physical EEG instead of just public data. I'd rather do both to actually measure the differences and a larger, more diverse sample space because there were 5 people. And but despite the fact that we did have a lot of trials to actually like balance it out, it would be nice to have a lot more people like participate in this trial itself. But thank you for this amazing opportunity of this presentation, and I hope you learned something new. But yeah, that's essentially the end of my presentation. But yeah, have a great day.